It's been quite the week in politics with much of the discussion surrounding the U.S. strikes on Iran. The White House now says it will limit intelligence sharing with Congress after leaks of preliminary damage assessments. North Central College political science professor and frequent contributor to the show, Dean Stephen Caliendo, is back to break down the new developments and another big day ahead. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Always appreciate you being here, so we're always better to have you. Yeah, the president authorized this military action without congressional approval, but admittedly he is not the first to do so. So give some context for people there.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. I mean, there's the language in the Constitution which clearly gives declaration of war power to Congress, but that's not practical, right? Especially in the old days when they didn't all, it took them a long time to get to Washington,
together,
right?
yeah.
Absolutely. So presidents have operated on their own when they needed to. After Vietnam, however, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution. That limited even further. But since that time, there's still been some give and take. I think what worries people most about this one is that this is a president who is trying to keep more power in the executive and keep Congress away. And the latest development that you just mentioned about not sharing as much security furders that narrative.
Yeah, and so let's talk a little bit more about that. The minute there was an intelligence sharing, at least a little bit, there was immediately a leak. Yeah, so what was an already contentious rift, if you will, with Congress around who should know and when, it kind of widened. Did anything come from the postponed bipartisan briefing that finally happened yesterday?
I think the fact that it was postponed ended up being more of the story than the substance that actually happened in the briefing itself. What's really important is that this notion of the Gang of Eight has been, for a long time, we've had this notion of a bipartisan group, very few people. So it's not that you take a whole foreign intelligence committee or you take a whole group, try to limit where there could be leaks. But this time, only the Republican members of the Gang of Eight got briefed prior to earlier on in the process. And so I think that created the rift.
Yeah, that was definitely a sticking point. And one of the Gang of Eight said that he found out on Twitter about what had taken place. So today could be another landmark day for the Supreme Court.
For sure.
You have 6 rulings that are coming before them that they have to drop today. So birthright, citizenship, LGBTQ plus, school book issues there, challenges to Obamacare. There's a list. How do you walk your students through the weight of what's before them right now?
That's a great question. Look, so many of these decisions today are going to be very substantive. I think the one that's getting the most news attention is the birthright citizen. That one is actually not very substantive. In other words, the court hasn't been asked to rule whether or not President Trump can unilaterally revoke birthright citizenship through an executive order. In fact, this is a very procedural question about where it should have happened and whether there should be lower cases that percolate. We heard the word percolate a lot during the oral arguments, right? And so what I try to help students understand is that the process is very important. The process is important. It's not that the Supreme Court simply sits up there, 9 people, and decides if something is right or wrong. They've got to decide whether the process was followed and whether the Constitution can hold, given the law that's in front of them at the time.
So what do you think is the most substantive thing before them?
I think the most substantive thing before the court today is the LGBT question. Because, again, it's part of our national narrative. It's Pride Month, right? So, in other words, that's not going to get lost in the way that the media contextualizes this. So that's the decision that I'm most interested in from a substantive perspective. But I really do want to hear how the court rules on this birthright citizenship case, because it will affect how other cases come before the court.
All right. Always appreciate having you here, and we'll bring you back soon. Thank you so much.